Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's class. I think this is our 7th class in regard to the Master Shantideva's 6th chapter. So let's go ahead and do a share screen of the prayers for tonight. We'll begin as usual with the praise to Shakimuni Buddha, this homage. Again, we're just going to do this one time tonight instead of the 3 times that it indicates there. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan. I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. Then let's go to the short mandala offering prayer. Again, we'll just do this in English, and as you're reciting this, visualize the entire phenomenal world transformed into a beautiful environment, all beautiful, pure things. We're making this vast, pure offering to the Buddhas, to the holy beings, so that we can receive their blessings and actualize the path to enlightenment. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryata Yami. And then refuge in bodhicitta before the teaching. We'll meditate on bodhicitta shortly, but bring to mind as we recite this verse once in English, twice in Tibetan, bring to mind first the concept of refuge, renewing whatever safe direction you feel personally in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. And then secondly, cultivating that mind of bodhicitta, that most far-reaching altruistic intention to benefit all beings by becoming a Buddha yourself. And so again, let's do this once in English, twice in the Tibetan. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye chodang soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi daki chönyen gi pe sanam gi dola penchir sangye drupar shok. Sangye chodang soki choknam la Jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi daki chönyen gi pe sanam gi dola penchir sangye drupar shok. Okay, good. Let's go ahead and do a short meditation before we start the class. Give ourselves a chance to focus the mind a bit. And then on the basis of that, we'll set our motivation together of bodhicitta. So just find a good meditation posture and begin to attend to the breath in whatever way suits your mind. And if at any point the mind wanders away from the breath, gets distracted, then at that stage, when we recognize that that's happened, we let go of the distraction and bring the mind back to the breath. No judgment, even if we have to do this many times over the next few minutes, that's perfectly fine. So I'll ring the chime here to start this period of silent meditation, and then after a few minutes in silence, I'll lead you in setting motivation. So now let's set our motivation of bodhicitta and recall how the foundation for bodhicitta, whichever technique we use to generate that mind, is equanimity. Equanimity being this mind that has an equal regard for all beings, that is free of the partiality that causes us to have attachment towards those we're very close to, our friends, causes us to have the aversion, the anger, the hatred even towards those that we consider to be our enemies or the difficult people in our lives. And even the indifference that we have towards the vast number of other beings who we consider to be strangers. So when we're doing this work on developing patience and trying to overcome the mind of anger, we see that this is necessary work if we are ever to establish bodhicitta in our hearts very deeply. We have to be rid of that bias that looks at those beings who have offended us or those that we love or helped those that we don't like. We have to be free of the bias of having anger, hatred towards them. How will we ever develop the mind of bodhicitta as well as continuing on the path, all the deeds of the Bodhisattva, without having a mind that is free of that anger? And of course, we also have to get rid of the attachment to friends that causes us to get upset when people harm those that we love, as we looked at last week. We also have to be free of the indifference, the lack of regard for those that are strangers. But we can especially relate this work on anger to that aspect of it. As long as we are blocking any being in our heart, especially through this mind of hatred or anger, we're incapable of developing bodhicitta, incapable of having that transcendent mind that embraces the welfare of all sentient beings. So within setting our motivation of bodhicitta, generate the sort of sub-motivation to want to overcome your anger so that you can develop that mind of bodhicitta very deeply. Bodhicitta is the answer to all of the world's problems. It's the answer to all of our problems and suffering and difficulty. With bodhicitta, as Lama Zopa says, not only do we gain our own enlightenment, but we also gain the happiness of liberation, the happiness of good rebirths, the happiness of this life. And moreover, upon attaining enlightenment, we are then able to bring all beings to happiness, our friends, all the vast numbers of strangers, as well as especially our enemies, the difficult people in our lives. So cultivate that motivation of bodhicitta for doing this work, but also recognizing that if we don't do this work, it'll be impossible for us to generate that mind fully, deeply. It will be impossible for us to enter the Mahayana path and achieve Buddhahood. So with this strong motivation, we're going to engage in another evening of looking at the teachings that help us to cultivate patience and to overcome our anger so we can eventually develop our qualities completely, and in that state help all sentient beings to do the same work, to become Buddhas themselves. Okay, good. So yeah, I brought up equanimity because we were in this section where we have looked at all of the harm that happens to ourselves. Again, in the past, the present, and the future harm that could happen. And then we looked at the next three, past, present, and future, with regard to friends, people that are harmed by others, and then we get upset at those others because they've harmed the people that are dear to us. And then we're in the third section where we look at the last three, those who have helped our enemies in the past, or are helping them currently, or will help them in the future. So, with regard to these biases that we have with, in relation to friends, enemies, strangers, others. This is an important part of the work that we're doing here, is to make sure that we don't have that mind that sort of gets in the way, becomes an obstacle to opening our hearts completely to all of these beings. And we're going to even touch on this a little bit in some of the future verses, because we see how necessary it is that we embrace all of these beings in the scope of that mind of bodhicitta. So let's go ahead and get back into the text and resume where we left off last time. So in terms of tonight's class, we are going to be working from verse 80. I'm just going to do a very brief review of what section we're in and what's going on, and then we'll immediately, get back into the verses. So we're in the section which, as I said just a few minutes ago, we went through that which faults the self, which included the 3 types of patience and all the ways that we work with our minds in the space of us being harmed. Obstacles to our own gain, things that cause us suffering and difficulty, all of those things we've already looked at. Not that we're going to completely, ignore that in the future, but nonetheless, we've done a lot of work on trying to address that. Then we had a short section that had to do with stopping anger at that which faults our friends, when our friends are being harmed, and the tendency that we have to think that we're completely justified in retaliating with a mind of anger towards those who we find dear, who are our dear ones, friends, loved ones, what have you. And then we went on to stopping anger at those benefiting one's enemies. So again, these are often called the 9 bases for anger in terms of beings: those who fault ourselves, past, present, and future; who fault our friends, past, present, future; and then again benefit our enemies in those 3 times. So we went on within this section. Last week we went through the first part, verses 76 through 79, which was about abandoning intolerance to the achievement of praise and renown by enemies. So this is the idea that when those people are praising our enemies, talking about the good qualities of those people who have offended us or have harmed us in some way, that we don't like other people to befriend them and say nice things about them and what have you. And so again, some of the logic we were looking at there was, if this is bringing happiness to other beings, to praise the good qualities of someone else, well, why wouldn't we be happy for them? If they are truly qualities that that person possesses, we should have some delight, some joy in that. Then we looked at within this, whoops, I'm sorry. I didn't want to go to the next slide yet. Within this also the idea of even if our own enemy were to become happy at receiving the praise from those people, that wouldn't be appropriate for us to have anger at that, because once more, that's not going to be the source of any great joy for ourselves. And if we begrudge someone else's happiness, even our enemy's happiness, and we would really begrudge anybody's happiness. There was that whole idea of, even taking away the wages that we give those who work for us and so on, because we don't really want to see anyone be happy. So again, I don't need to comment, I think, on the other verses. Let's go on then to this next section, abandoning intolerance to them, achieving their happiness. We're on page 32 of Gyaltsab Je's commentary towards the top there. And let's go ahead and look at verse 80. There's only one verse in this section. Having generated the mind of enlightenment, bodhicitta, through wishing all sentient beings to be happy, why do you become angry if sentient beings find happiness themselves? So this is, a good point. If we see others attaining happiness, why would we get upset at that? Especially we're going back to this idea of people who are praising our enemies, the people that we don't like, people saying things about their good qualities and what have you, that we don't want to take any delight in that, because we begrudge them that happiness because it's directed towards our enemies. But if we are intent upon this mind of benefiting all beings and developing ourselves to that degree and wanting all beings to have happiness, why wouldn't we want them to have that happiness? And we're not talking about sentient beings having misguided happiness. Like, I still remember the scenes from wherever Osama bin Laden was at the time after 9/11 occurred, and they had like a video they released of them all sitting around a table, watching what was unfolding in New York City and other places in the US on the basis of what they did on 9/11, and laughing about it, being joyous about it. We wouldn't want other people to take joy in others' misery, just like we don't want to take joy in another person's misery. But at the same time, if they've got genuine happiness that is coming about through virtue, through good causes, through qualities that they have, why would we begrudge them that? So in here, Gyaltsab Je in his commentary says, one has generated the mind of enlightenment out of the wish to place all sentient beings in the highest happiness of enlightenment, and has accepted subsequently to practice the training. So this is, again, what we all are about and trying to do. Again, we may not have spontaneous bodhicitta yet, where we are on the actual path, a card-carrying bodhisattva and what have you. But nonetheless, this is our intention, is to become enlightened and lead all beings to the happiness of enlightenment. Hence, when sentient beings find a little of their own happiness and achieve their wish, then why are you now angry? It is suitable to be happy. So again, I don't know that we need to say much more about that verse. I think it's pretty self-explanatory. Makes more sense for us to be happy when others have some measure of happiness in their life, even though we might not want those good thoughts and praise and so on to be directed at that particular person. We should still be happy if they are recognizing others' qualities and so on. The next outline is abandoning intolerance to others achieving gain. So we've already talked about those obstructing our own gain. Now, when others are going to have some gain, getting what they want and so on, how we need to be tolerant with that and actually, again, take some delight in that, some joy in that. There are two sections within this: contemplating that it achieves one's wish, and then contemplating the non-lack of wish. We'll get into what that means once we get to that section. Within contemplating that it achieves one's own wish, there are three parts to this. The first one is it is suitable to be happy if sentient beings achieve gain, if they actually do acquire things, have material gain, success, what have you. So verse 81 is in this section. It's the only verse in this. It says, if I wish for all sentient beings to become Buddhas worshipped by the three worlds, then why am I tormented due to seeing them receiving just vile gain and honor? I'm not sure why Ziggy chose vile, but actually I looked up vile, and there is an obscure meaning for it that does mean kind of meager or paltry. Vile, when we often talk about it and as we use it in our language, isn't maybe quite what's being described here. But the idea is if they get some modest gain, some meager gain, we should be happy at them. We shouldn't be tormented due to them seeing this, them receiving that. If we are intent upon bringing all beings to that state, to become a Buddha ourselves, and then be dedicated to that, to be worshipped by the three worlds. The three worlds, by the way, sometimes it's translated as the three realms. It can be interpreted in two different ways. One is the three realms of the desire realm, which is where the human realm is located, among what are called the six realms of the desire realm. And then we have the form realm and the formless realm. And so again, in all three of those, the Buddhas are praised in a sense because there is, they're the crown jewel of all of those realms. But then we can also talk, in one teacher, I think it was Geshe Jampa Tekchok, in his commentary, says the three realms could also be below the earth, underground, on the ground, which is where we're all located, and then above the ground, birds and what have you, insects, those beings that live up in the space above the ground. But that gets pretty earth-centric, so I don't know. Again, the idea here is that they're receiving the greatest amount of praise wherever you talk about in the world. They are the objects of that praise. So here Gyaltsab Je says, one has accepted the promise to place all sentient beings in the state of complete enlightenment that is honored by the three worlds. Since one wishes this, when one sees that sentient beings attain some miserable praise, then why does one become miserable? It is merely that one's wishes are attained. So whether they're getting praise, gain, whatever the case might be, any of these worldly things, well, certainly those worldly things are not what we're ideally hoping for beings. That we want them to go beyond that to achieve the greatest happiness of enlightenment. Nonetheless, if they receive some temporal benefit, some happiness in this life, we should be happy for them. We shouldn't be miserable in seeing that. There's an example then that Shantideva sets out that kind of gives a way of comparing this. And this is the next section, verse 82. If relatives for whom you are caring and to whom you practice giving are able to find their own livelihood, would you not be happy rather than angry? So he uses the example of like if you had a child or someone who you cared for and they were able to find their own livelihood through someone else, providing it for them. Wouldn't that make you happy? I'm sure those of you who've had children, you would have been delighted if somebody would have become a benefactor and paid for your child's care and schooling and everything involved in that. But Master Shantideva's text is commented on this way by Gyaltsab. If the child to be nurtured by you receives from a friend what you should have given, so that it becomes unnecessary for you to give anymore, how is it suitable to like being unhappy or to become angry? Wouldn't you rather be happy at that when they're taken care of? You don't have to necessarily do that. I mean, you'd still want to do that, would still have that desire to care for them, but you'd be happy that they're being cared for, that they've received what they want. And then the third part of this, if one does not wish for that, the mind of enlightenment degenerates. If we aren't kind of taking delight in others receiving some praise, having some gain in their life and so on, whether they are friends of our enemies or whoever they are, well, then we're defeating the mind of enlightenment. We're defeating our bodhicitta. So verse 83 says, what kind of person wishes enlightenment for migrating beings if they do not wish for them to have even this? And where is there a mind of enlightenment in them who become angry at the wealth of others? So again, we can't find this bodhicitta mind to be upheld within this logic. If we're not wishing for sentient beings even to have this meager amount of praise or gain in their lives, it doesn't make sense in the mind of it, within the mind of bodhicitta. We got kind of a similar theme going through all three of these verses. Our anger doesn't make sense if we're really intent upon the welfare of others, whether it be their own personal wealth or their praise or whatever it is that happens for them. So at the top of page 33 of Gyaltsab's commentary, he says, if someone begrudges migrators, even small gains of food, clothing, and so forth, then how can this person be someone wishing sentient beings to attain enlightenment? Once someone gets angry at the common wealth of others, then how can that person possess the mind of enlightenment that wishes to place all migrators in the state of enlightenment? It's just incongruous. Once more, we saw this in previous sections where Master Shantideva is simply pointing out the incongruity, the lack of logic and sense. We act one way, but that's contradictory to how we want to behave or what are the goals that we're setting or the way in which we achieve things, that we go against our own wishes for happiness by being angry at others and so on. So again, he's just pointing out the inconsistencies that are in our thinking so that we can then correct our thinking to the proper way. The last sentence in this, it says, since the mind of enlightenment degenerates, one should abandon jealousy toward the gain of others, or hatred, anger, that follows from that. Okay, so then we get into this next section that is, the heading is contemplating the non-lack of wish. So let's look at the sections within this. The first is, it is unsuitable to be jealous of the gain of others. And let's take a look at verse 84 that has to do with this. Whether that person obtains it from the enemy, or whether it remains in the benefactor's house, in either case, you shall get nothing. What is the use, whether that person is given something or not? So the idea here is that, we're looking at it from the point of this idea of non-lack of wish, is the idea that if we are wishing for it, but we're not going to get anything from this, whether that person, so let's use the example of somebody is helping your enemy by giving them money to, so they can have more things in their life, be more comfortable in their life or what have you. If you get angry at that, well, it's not going to make any difference. That benefactor, that person isn't going to give the money to you because you get angry at them. Your anger at that whole situation doesn't make any sense because you're not going to receive a thing regardless. It's money that they are choosing to give to that particular person. It has nothing to do with you. So your wish to, get upset and angry at that and be jealous of that or what have you doesn't have any effect on the situation at all. So here Gyaltsab says, regardless of whether the enemy receives food, clothing, and so forth from the benefactor, or whether it is food, clothing, and so forth remaining in the benefactor's home, in any case, oneself will not have it. You yourself will not get it. Sorry to say, you're not going to get it just by your having angry and being upset at somebody having done that for your enemy. So regardless of whether it is given to the enemy or not, what use is your jealousy? What use would be your anger at that whole situation? Then the next outlined heading, continuing with this theme of this non-lack of wish, that even if you wish for it, you're not going to get it, is that it is unsuitable to destroy one's qualities. Verse 85. So why do I throw away my good qualities, my merit and faith? Tell me, why am I not angry for not holding what will be gain? In other words, why am I not upset at myself for not doing what would actually cause me to gain rather than for me to lose out in this whole situation? It's contradictory thinking. You know, we think that if we get upset because somebody's aiding our enemy, that somehow we're going to get something out of that. We actually lose from that, because when we generate the mind of anger, and particularly if, you know, other acts follow from that, if we have the mind of ill will within our own minds, well, that's already bad enough. But then if we, you know, do something, say something to that person, or, you know, damage their property or whatever the case might be, well, then we've gone to the point of creating non-virtue on the basis of those thoughts. So we are losing just by the thoughts, but we can lose even more. So here, Gyaltsab Je says, again, we're still on page 33, if one is angry at the gain of others and wishes gain for oneself, then why destroy with anger the causes for gain, such as merits, the behavior that causes faith in the lay's mind, one's qualities of morality, listening, and so forth? So it's like we're going to burn up all of those good qualities for the sake of getting upset at this person, you know, having helped our enemy. When in fact, if we really want gain, we would do the opposite again. We would practice patience. We would rejoice in their good fortune and someone helping them and so on. We would be happy for them, because that's the mind that actually leads to profit, you know, through developing merit, through having good actions that follow from them. So without holding the causes for gain, which one destroys, ask yourself, why do I not get angry at myself? I mean, why am I not angry actually at this time at myself for not taking advantage of this opportunity to practice something that will actually lead to gain? And not that we get attached to gain. It's not the point of this verse. This verse is saying that if you really want to have a win-win situation, you need to rejoice in others' good fortune, whether it's your enemy being benefited by somebody else or what. You know, rejoice in that. And once more, we're not talking about when people are doing things with bad intention. Like if someone is funding, you know, some militant group that's going to just, you know, kill people and cause mayhem in the world or what have you. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about, again, somebody who is simply helping that person out because they like that person. Recall that one of the reasons why we can have equanimity is because of the difference in relationships that other beings have to each other. Our enemy might be somebody's dear friend. In fact, no doubt is somebody's dear friend. They have somebody who thinks the world of them, who sees their good qualities and admires them and wants to take care of them and love them and benefit them. You know, so they've got a different view of that person. And our view, of course, this gets into the emptiness teachings, our view is based on our own projection and clinging to the things that that person has done that have harmed us, that make the enemy into an inherent enemy, that they're just painted enemy from top to bottom. And that's how we label them and relate to them. But somebody could see them entirely differently because they're not inherently an enemy. So again, if we want to gain from this, if gain is really what we're trying to accomplish so that we can continue our spiritual progress, so that we can have good fortune in our lives and so on, well, then we would do the opposite. We wouldn't get jealous and angry and upset when somebody is helping somebody that we don't like. So here, let's go on then to the last section in regard to this non-lack of wish. The last outline is headed, it is suitable to mourn one's negativities, but unsuitable to be jealous of others' virtue. So again, these are all kind of on the same theme. That's why they're sort of lumped together in this section. So we see some of the same ideas. The idea here is being expressed by Shantideva. He says, not only do you not have any sorrow or regret for having committed those negativities, do you now wish to compete with others who have actually created merit? You know, the idea is that we're sort of, you know, even getting jealous of others and so on while we're committing negativities and not even having regret for them, we're putting ourselves in a really silly position, you know, thinking that we're so great when our jealousy is going to be destroying whatever merits we have, because we're not even having regret on the basis of what we're thinking and doing and so on, in this whole scenario of, again, someone helping, aiding, praising our enemy. So here at the very bottom of page 33, Gyaltsab says, not only do you not mourn or regret the cause for not receiving any gain, the negativities that you created earlier, you also compete with the merits previously created by others and are jealous because you cannot bear them. Is this not unsuitable? So the idea is that we haven't even created the causes for such good fortune, the merit, because we've engaged in this negative thinking and these negative patterns, jealousy, anger, and so on. Well, then how can we compare ourselves to others who have done that, who are obviously in a position where they're receiving that good fortune? So it's again the way that the mind just gets twisted and doesn't really see things clearly. Again, the proper response at a time like this, when someone is aiding, praising, whatever, your enemy, is to rejoice in the good fortune, to look at it from that positive angle. No one experiences anything in terms of worldly achievements or beyond this world without having created the causes. Recall that karma is the fundamental principle that's underneath all of this. We spoke about it quite a bit earlier in the course. But when we see someone else experiencing the good fruits of their positive karma, their merits, we should be happy for them, because the only reason why they have that is because of what they created in the past. Now, again, this doesn't mean that we rejoice in what they're doing with that, or the negative actions that that person is doing that are harming us or those that we love and so on. Those actions are to be seen differently. But the good fortune of having someone come to their aid, praise them, see their qualities, benefit them through material gain and what have you, this is something we should be happy about. We should be rejoicing in. We shouldn't be jealous of it. His Holiness really emphasizes this on page 91 of his commentary, at least the version I have, that older version. He talks about how jealousy actually destroys our wealth. They say that one of the main ways that we actually obtain good things in our lives is by rejoicing in the good fortune of others. Remember, there's a story in the Lam Rim. I don't remember all the details of it, but it was like the Buddha was invited to this huge gathering that this king did, that the king was kind of a show-off and really just wanting to make this huge celebration for the Buddha. And there was a beggar who was outside the castle, the palace, and he was like seeing this all going on and all these people coming to this amazing gathering, and he was rejoicing in the good fortune of all this and the man being able to do this for the Buddha and so on. At the very end of the night, the Buddha was asked, who created the most merit here this evening or something, which I don't know if that was like a regular way to end an evening with the Buddha, but he said, that it wasn't the person who put on the event, it was actually the beggar who was outside the walls who was rejoicing, because the motivation in the person, the king or whatever that was doing this, wasn't so wholesome. He was actually doing it out of his pride and wanting to show off again a bit. So again, rejoicing is a more appropriate response to others' good fortune. We don't have it. And again, as was pointed out earlier, we're not even going to get it. Our being angry at somebody who's benefiting our enemy isn't going to do anything to increase our own wealth. In fact, it depletes our merits. So now we go on. We've finished this stopping anger for undesired actions, things that are happening. That again, this all has to do with our enemies, with the people who we I'm sorry, with undesired actions, we looked at it from the point of view of all three of them, the happening to us, happening to our friends, and happening to our enemies. So now we're looking at the next section, which is a rather large section. It goes almost to the end of the chapter. And this is stopping anger at obstructions to one's wishes. So it's kind of interesting. I mean, we do continue with some of the same themes that we've seen in terms of our enemies, in terms of people getting in the way of our things that bring us happiness and so on. But this is just kind of where Shantideva brings up a number of things, because there still is this mind. Let me take it off screen for a moment. We still have this mind that wants to justify our anger at somebody. That somehow we feel like if we frame it in the right way, we can get upset and angry at somebody for doing this. And none of those things hold up. Master Shantideva is going to go through and kind of poke holes in every one of them. We're going to see how he looks at some of the other eight worldly dharmas, that we want praise, we want a good reputation. We might think that those are good things to have, even as dharma practitioners, that it's good for us to have, a good reputation, some fame, not be criticized, and so on. He's going to, poke holes in that. And then we're going to talk about, well, but maybe they're getting in the way of my practicing merit. So it's good for me to get angry at them if they're thwarting my merit. And he'll poke holes in that. This is essentially a whole section where it's just kind of a catch-all of a number of other things where we tend to justify in our minds that it's perfectly fine to get angry in this particular situation. And of course, there is no situation where anger, the delusion of anger, is justifiable. As His Holiness pointed out, that I went way back at the beginning, I pointed out how he prefers the use of this word hatred when we talk about it in English, because he does feel that there is a justifiable anger, if you will, that can be directed to addressing situations in our culture that need to be addressed, social justice issues and so on. But that's really not a mind of anger that we're talking about here. If one is doing that correctly, one's doing that with compassion, with a wish to benefit all beings. So again, we're going to see a number of these little scenarios coming up in this section that kind of give us ways of looking at things, so that we don't have any justification for anger. The very first of these is impatience with obstacles to the harm of one's enemies is unsuitable. So we might think, that people who are getting in the way of harming our enemies are worthy of being, angry at. And this is just three verses here, 87, 88, and 89. Let's look at this in terms of, this is page 34 of Gyaltsab Je. The next outline he has is, one is not benefited by the enemy's dislike. So the idea is if something got in the way of thwarting the enemy, so that the enemy actually had something good happen for them, Master Shantideva says, even if your enemy is not joyful, what is there for you to be joyful about? So the argument that's put forward here is, I am happy when the enemy receives harm, and I get angry at what obstructs this harm. So we're kind of putting all of this justification that it's good for our enemy to be thwarted and to have harm occur to them and to not get what our enemy wants. And the answer that is given in the verse is, even though one's enemy generates dislike and is unhappy, what is there for you to be happy about? It does not benefit you, but harms you. Again, this is pretty much the same logic that we saw earlier, is that when we have a mind of anger or jealousy or whatever the case might be, we're harming ourselves. And there's that, I pointed out that one text, The Wheel of Sharp Weapons, by Dhammarakshita, where he uses this idea of we're sending things out with the intention to harm someone else or do something, and it comes back around to harm us. That's the karmic effect of all of these things. We think that we're getting back at that person, and we take delight when they get harmed or when somebody gets in the way of their happiness and so on. But we're ending up harming ourselves. Whether they're happy, joyful, whatever's going on for them, doesn't have any effect on us at all. Our own state of mind in terms of directing that anger towards them or being jealous of them is what dictates what we experience. And the only thing that we're going to experience from those states of mind is harm in the future. Then the next outline is, generating harmful intent towards the enemy does not harm them. So even if we were to generate some sort of mind that is intent upon harming them, that mind alone doesn't actually cause their harm. It doesn't have any fruits in that regard. The only person who's harmed again is ourselves. So this is the last part of verse 87. It says, your mind merely wishing them to be harmed did not cause them to be harmed. So we don't have that powerful of minds. The mind's a very powerful thing, but just our thoughts of somebody wishing to be harmed, to actually have to experience something that's bad, that alone does not cause that to happen. So in fact, as I was saying earlier, it causes harm to ourselves. This is essentially that mind that is part of the 10 non-virtues, the mind that's called ill will or harmful intent. It's the 9th of the 10 non-virtues. It is a mind that generates some joy at thinking of others having to experience harm, having to experience suffering, having to experience, and becomes even strong enough to where we want to even be perhaps a part of that, or we're really delighted when that happens. And this is not a very wholesome state of mind. It's a non-virtuous state of mind. So here, very short commentary from Gyaltsab Je, the middle of page 34. He says, just your mental wish alone that thinks, may the enemy receive harm, does not cause harm to the enemy. Therefore, since your purpose is not achieved in the slightest, abandon anger. Just kind of pointing out that once more, you might feel that there are times when it's quite justifiable to wish the enemy to be harmed, to wish for obstacles to what the enemy wants to arise, whatever the case might be. Those are not wholesome thoughts. They don't lead to anything that's productive. And in fact, they aren't the cause of your enemy experiencing any harm. You know, those thoughts alone. Of course, if we become the agent of doing that, well, then we've created even worse karma. Mental karma is bad enough. You know, when we engage in physical acts to thwart them or to cause harm to them, well, then we would, definitely be ruining it, kind of screwing it all up. So the kind of culmination of this third section within this part, it harms oneself, is the next outline. And that actually what is going on here, you're not benefited by whatever the enemy experiences. Your enemy is not harmed by whatever your intentions are. In fact, it harms yourself. So this is, again, some of the same sort of things we've seen, but just being put and addressed to this particular situation of having obstacles to the harm of one's enemies and so on. So this first part is, it is unsuitable to be happy over the suffering of the enemy. Shantideva says, even if their suffering is established due to your wish, what is there for you to be joyful about? I mean, even if our wishes, our intentions were strong enough for us to be able to create harm in another person just by virtue of that thought, what's there to be joyful about? Have you done anything that meritorious? No, you've created a harmful mind. So here I'm going to skip Gyaltsabje's commentary and share Abbot Dragpa Gyaltsen's, which is actually in the handout that you were all given at the beginning of the course. Even if the suffering of the other party is established due to your wishing, may my enemy be ruined. What is there for you to be joyful about? For there is not the slightest benefit. And as we've been seeing, it will only come back around to harm you. You're taking delight in the other person's suffering and then wishing for them to for that to happen. And if it were the cause, if somehow your wish could cause it to happen, there's nothing to be happy about. There's no benefit from that. The second part of this outline at the bottom of page 34 is, holding on to this happiness becomes the cause for great suffering for oneself. Of course, this is that whole thing that we're really admonished by. I've had so many of my teachers that have really cautioned us never to take delight in the suffering of another, because this is really, such an unwholesome mind, can cause so many problems for ourselves. So the opinion is put forward in the last part of verse 88, I shall be satisfied, that this will actually satisfy me mentally, to see them experiencing some harm. The response, how could there be anything more ravaging than that? Your delight in someone else's suffering is sad. It's disastrous. So then in verse 89, having been held by this unbearable and sharp hook cast by the fishermen of the afflictions, it is certain that I shall be cooked in the pots of sentient beings' hell by the hell guardian. So he's kind of saying, you've gotten hooked and you're going to suffer from it. If this is what you're constantly engaging in, is being satisfied at the harm being caused to others that we don't like. So I'm here as well sharing Abbot Dragpa Gyaltsen's commentary. I just found the wording to be a little bit better than Venerable Fedor's translation of Gyaltsabje. The opinion is, if harm occurs to my enemy, since my wishes are fulfilled, I shall be satisfied. Response, how could there be anything more ravaging than generating that violent, harmful intent? For you will proceed to the bad migrations. For example, fishermen catch fish with iron hooks and then cook them. Likewise, I shall definitely be caught by this unbearable and sharp iron hook of the negative action of violent, harmful intent, cast by the fishermen of the affliction, hatred. Having been held by it, it is certain that I shall be put into the pots or cauldrons of sentient beings' hell by the hell guardians and then cooked. So kind of giving us a rather ominous, outcome to these thoughts of taking delight in someone else's harm, being satisfied when someone, our own enemy, experiences suffering. Then there is a quote from that's in Abbot Dr. Gyaltsen's text from Lama Tsongkhapa, the Lamrim Chenmo. Just your negative thought that delights in your enemy's misfortunes and thinks, if only they were destroyed, does not harm your enemy. That's what we saw in the beginning part of this, right? They lead only to your own suffering. Even if such a negative thought were to harm them, you should stop it in every way, reflecting on the drawback that it would ravage yourself and others. Okay, so now we go into a little bit larger section, having concluded that part that again had to do with being impatient with obstacles to the harm. In other words, wanting harm to come to our enemies. Now we're looking at on page 35 of Gyaltsab Je, the second outline, which again is a fairly large chunk of verses. It is unsuitable to be impatient with obstacles to one's own benefit and obstacles to the benefit of those belonging to one side. So once more, these are, again, as I was saying a few minutes ago, many of these things sound kind of familiar in terms of other things we've talked about, but it's just Shantideva trying to make sure that we don't in any way justify that there are times when it's appropriate to get angry. Just as what we just saw, it's not appropriate to get upset, if your enemy isn't experiencing the harm that they deserve. A lot of people do a lot of despicable things in the world. I mean, we might really rejoice and think it's wonderful when they experience, something horrible from that. But that's not a good thought to have. We should, again, have some compassion for those beings that are under the control of their delusions, doing all sorts of things that cause them to eventually experience suffering, pain, difficulty. There's no justification for any of these things we're going to look at. So this goes into, again, quite a few verses, and we'll see how far we get tonight. But these are a bunch of examples of things that we can explore and once more poke holes in any type of justification. So within this, it is unsuitable to be impatient with obstacles to one's own benefit and so on. The first of these two outlines is anger at obstructions to worldly dharmas is unsuitable. Now we've already looked at some of the worldly dharmas. Most of you will recall the 8 worldly dharmas. We're mostly talking about getting the first 4 and avoiding the second 4 because they are in pairs. So we have in terms of the 8, we have on the one side the material gain and then loss, and then we have comfort or pleasure, happiness, and then discomfort, displeasure that we want to avoid. And then we have praise that we all love to receive, and the criticism that we don't want to receive, or the blame, that type of thing. And then we have finally the good reputation that we want to possess versus the ill repute that we want to avoid. Now again, these things in and of themselves are not problems. There's no problem with having material gain in this life. It's the attachment to that. And then of course, attachment is the doorway through which anger arises, because we get upset when someone tries to get in the way of our gain, when we have loss, or when someone tries to take something from us that we already have. So again, we already looked at gain to some degree, material gain, and we've already sort of touched here and there even on our own happiness. Remember how all of this started way back towards the beginning about Master Shantideva saying that the seed for anger is mental unhappiness. That's the fuel from which all of this arises. So we can't get too attached to always needing to be happy, always needing to be comfortable, always needing to have things go our way. That's part of the 8 worldly dharmas, is that tendency we have to latch onto things as if they're supposed to stay that way. There's nothing wrong with having things that way, but wake up, folks, and of course we've been waking up, all of us, to this reality over the last several months where, we all want it to be something different, but our own wish to have it be something different isn't going to do much, because we have to deal with the world at large and what's occurring in our world. So we see even in our own times right now that we're going to have obstacles to having those worldly dharmas. And when those arise, if we get angry and upset and so on, there's no benefit to that. That's and it's also getting caught up in worldly affairs. That's why these are called the worldly or the mundane dharmas, because they don't amount to anything. Remember how when we looked at gain, the whole idea was that no matter how much gain you have in your life, you can collect, everything there is in the world to collect, all the precious gems and all the money and so on. You're going to have to leave it all behind at the end of this life. In the grand scheme of things, it's not going to amount to anything. Now, as people of the Mahayana lineage, we want to do something good with those resources. That's why it's fine to have the causes, create the causes for having gain in your life, for having, all these other factors. But don't, get so attached to them that you create problems and difficulties and more delusion and, negative actions because you're holding on to them so tightly. These things, they come and they go. We have a whole lifetime to experience them, but then once this life ends, they're all gone. So again, this is what we're getting into, is some of these obstructions to worldly dharmas. And this is going to be, again, from verses 90 through 101. So there are a number of outlines within this. Whoops, sorry, went 2 screens ahead. We're talking about here the anger at obstructions to the worldly dharmas. First, we have anger at obstructions to receiving praise and having a good reputation, that this is unsuitable, to get angry at things that obstruct our praise and our good reputation. So there are 4 outlines within this. There is no need for mere praise and reputation. Once more, all of the praise and good reputation we have in this life, it doesn't last. So this is the beginning part of this is verse 90 and the first part of 91. The honor of praise and fame will turn into neither merit nor life. It will turn into neither strength nor freedom from sickness for me, and also will not transform into physical happiness. If I were to understand my welfare, what is there in them that is my welfare? In praise and fame, is there anything that really produces my welfare? We get so attached to it, but when it comes down to it, it doesn't even provide us with the simplest things for this life or our next life. It doesn't have much effect on this life even. And that's where we do look at, I'm going to use Abbot Drukpa Gyaltsen's commentary on this rather than using Gyaltsabje's. And I've detailed out of this 5 things that are mentioned here, and these are actually talked about in most of the commentaries as the 5 sort of objects that sentient beings desire. So the opinion is put forward, if my praise and fame are hindered, I shall be unhappy. So I am justified in getting angry and upset at those who get in the way of my praise and my fame, my good reputation, and so on. The response is the honor of explicit praise and hidden fame will turn into neither merit, which is of course more directed at future lives. We do have some merit that we can create in this life that would be, ripen within this life, but a lot of our merit doesn't ripen until future lives. It doesn't also increase your lifespan. From among the 5 objects desired by beings, it will turn into neither the cause for developing my strength, the third one, it doesn't increase your vitality, nor the cause for freedom from sickness, makes you, immune to having any problems with illness. And it also will not transform into physical happiness, into physical pleasure. These are I don't know where this list comes from, 5 objects desired by beings, but nonetheless, whatever praise and fame that you receive, it doesn't have even any physical effects on this life, much less create merit for future lives. If every time someone praised you, it created some merit that you were able to experience in the future, well, that would be wonderful, but it's not the case. Usually, praise and fame become obstacles for us, as we see in the 8 worldly dharmas. Hence, if I were to understand how to analyze what will become my welfare and what will not, then what is there in praise and fame that is my welfare? There is not the slightest in them. Of course, again, I pointed this out before when if you want to pursue any further study of the 8 worldly dharmas, there's a whole book by Lama Zopa Rinpoche that's available from Lama Yeshe Wisdom Archive, lamayeshe.com. That's called the 8 worldly concerns or 8 worldly dharmas. I can't remember the exact name. Let me look on my shelf here real quickly and see if I see it there. Actually, it's called How to Practice Dharma. It's about the 8 worldly concerns. It's called How to Practice Dharma. And of course, the point of it is that we aren't practicing Dharma if all we're getting caught up in is the 8 worldly concerns. If we are living our lives for obtaining those 4, having material gain, having a comfortable, pleasant life, having praise, having a good reputation, and then trying to avoid the opposite, and that's all that we get preoccupied with, and we have strong attachment to that, well then you've wasted this life. You haven't really practiced Dharma. And some people, even in their practice of the Dharma, infuse their practice of the Dharma with those 8 worldly concerns. So those are to be abandoned because it's attachment to this life. It's attachment to the comforts of this life that are all over when this life ends. And moreover, as is being pointed out here, we keep getting caught up in familiar patterns of anger and upset when we don't get those things, attachment and desire when we do get them. They just perpetuate our stay in samsara. So again, these are to be avoided because they don't produce anything that is of any great merit. So as it says here, if we were to understand how to analyze what will become my welfare and what will not, actually abandoning the eight worldly concerns will become your welfare. Ceasing to be attached to material gain, praise, comfort, and so on, that will be of greater benefit than continuing to run after them. So, there's nothing in praise and fame that is my welfare, not the slightest in them. So now let's go on to the next outline of these four. This is the bottom of page 35. It is unsuitable if mere mental happiness or, being pleased is the objective. So someone might say, well, but I really want to be happy. I just want to have that temporary happiness. Well, Master Shantideva's got a very clever answer for that one. He says, if I desire just mental happiness, then I should devote myself to gambling and so forth, and also drinking and, carousing and doing whatever it is that I want to do that'll make me happy in the moment. That's all that the eight worldly concerns are about, is having that sort of temporary, transitory happiness. So let's go to what Gyaltsab says on this on the bottom of page 35. He says, if one's sole objective is mere mental happiness, mere pleasure, then one also needs to rely on gambling, singing and dancing, taking someone else's woman and drinking alcohol, or someone else's partner. But the idea here is that, again, all of these things that are just producing worldly pleasure are equal pursuits then. Why do you get so bent out of shape over not getting praise and fame when, you should just, and if, you say, well, I just want to be happy. I just want the pleasure of people saying good things about me and being well thought of. Well, then go hog wild, go for whatever pleasures you want, because it's the same with them. They're all just simply transitory pleasures. They don't last. They don't produce anything good beyond that moment of pleasure. So now we go on to the third outline within this section about, our obstructions to receiving praise and reputation, how this is unsuitable. The third outlines the top of page 36. It says, it is distorted to make merely this one's objective. So if this is all that you're after, well then, you're on the wrong path. This is not what the Buddhist path is about. And then this is divided into two parts. The first one is mere praise and reputation are needless. Let's look at verse 92. If for the sake of fame I lose my wealth or get myself killed, what can mere words do then? Once I am dead, to whom will they give pleasure? This is again that idea that I talked about earlier, that every good thing that anybody's ever said about you is just words. They're just words. And, and if for the sake of obtaining that fame and praise, you manipulate your wealth, do things with it to obtain good fortune, good favors from others and so on, and you might even get yourself killed for honor, as, people do who fight great battles or what have you. If you do all of that and you end up with just negative karma, well, then what good is your praise and fame then? Once you're dead, there's no one else who's going to receive any pleasure from that. Gyaltsab, again, this is page 36, says, not only are they meaningless, which is what we just looked at, they don't really have any meaning, any importance, but in order to have renown as a generous person, one then gives away wealth, but again, not just practices good generosity, but manipulates others with that wealth in order to gain favors from them, in order to be thought of well by them, in order to be famous in the world. You have a kind of that type of motivation. And to be known as courageous, one goes to war, fights all these great battles and ends up being thought of as some superhero. If one then even loses one's life, what will one do with the words of praise and reputation? And what good are they at that point if you end up losing your life through that, or even you go through this life and you might have all of these things that you accumulate, all this good reputation and what have you. It doesn't do any good when you're dead. Consider to whom praise and reputation will give happiness after one has died. They might be able to write a few more things on your tombstone or say a few more things in your eulogy, but you're dead at that point. You're not even receiving that praise. that praise is gone. That praise is not something you experience any great benefit from. And in fact, as is pointed out here, you can even generate great harm from it because you've used all these ulterior things, to obtain that praise and done all these things that really are not so wholesome. The second outline is disliking their degeneration means one is like a child. So if we get really upset when we lose our praise or our reputation, we're being childish. When their sandcastles collapse, children howl in despair. Likewise, when my praise and reputation decline, my mind becomes like a child. So we use this word childish or being like children a lot. And the idea is that we are confused, we are ignorant, we are doing things with wrong motivation. If we get really upset that we're not receiving this praise and having a good reputation, it's like being upset at a sandcastle that's the tide has come in and it's collapsed, due to the water, uh, causing it to fall and what have you. So again, this is the ways that we're childish. Here I'm also going to use Abbot Dr. Gyaltsen's commentary because I liked how he included some other things in here. It's a very short commentary in Gyaltsabje's. For example, when their sandcastles collapse, children howl in despair. Likewise, when my praise and reputation decline, out of unhappiness, my mind becomes like a child. It is just as has been said in Tsongkhapa's, this is the great stages of the path, the Lamrim Chenmo. When others praise you and spread your fame, it serves neither of two purposes. For this life, it does not bring you long life, freedom from sickness and the like, and for future lives it does not produce the attainment of merit and so forth. So this was what we saw earlier in terms of those 5 objects that are desired, freedom from sickness, long life, and so on, as well as merit. Merit being the one that has to do with future lives. Therefore, do not be attached to fame and praise, but reproach yourself by thinking, excuse me, my unhappiness when they decline is no different from when small children cry upon the collapse of their sandcastles, which lack any of the requisites of a dwelling. So you might think, this is a beautiful sandcastle that I built, and it isn't even something that you can live in. It was just there as an ornamentation on the beach, and I've seen some pretty amazing things. I was in San Diego once when they had a sand structure competition down on the beaches there, and it was pretty amazing. But it's all temporary. It's all impermanent. I like this little quote, so I threw it in here from Pema Chodron's commentary that again was originally called No Time to Lose. Now I think it's called Becoming Bodhisattvas. She says there's a Peanuts cartoon that shows Lucy building an elaborate sandcastle, saying proudly, and 1,000 years from now, people will see what I did here today and be totally amazed. It's this nonsensical attitude that Shantideva addresses here, that we get caught up in kind of some appearance of being this wonderful, magnanimous, spectacular, brave, courageous being or something. And most people are just wiped from history like the sandcastles from the beaches. There's nothing in any of those attainments that amounts to anything. Our praise and fame don't produce any great results. And then finally, the last outline in this middle of page 36, the reason for it being distorted, the reason for our attachment to praise and fame and so on, why this is problematic. We have 2 sections to this. Attachment to the praising of oneself is unsuitable. Excuse me a moment, I'm going to take a drink of water. Okay, thank you. So we have 2 verses within this, 94 and 95. Since short-lived sounds are without mind, they cannot possibly think of praising me. It makes others happy. That fame is counted as a cause of joy. We'll explain all this in a moment because there's kind of different arguments that are being put out. Whether this praise is directed at myself or someone else, how shall I be benefited by others' joy? Since that joy is theirs alone, I shall not obtain even a part of it. So the idea behind this is that we're kind of being, there's sort of this was actually coming from Kunzang Peldon's commentary, which again I referred to in a couple of places. This is a commentary by a Sakya Lama. He says we might wonder whether the joy we have in being well spoken of or praised and so on, whether this derives from the pleasure taken in the words of praise, the actual words themselves? Is there something kind of from that side of the words that is the source of that joy that we get, the happiness that we have, the attachment to that, and so on? Or is it from the state of mind of the person who praises us, because they're taking joy and they're having these good thoughts and so on? So the first instance is explained in Gyaltsabje's commentary on the bottom of 36. It says, if one is happy because of being praised, it is, for instance, unsuitable to like the praising sound, the actual sound of the words. Why? Because that sound does not have a mind and can therefore not have the thought thinking, I shall benefit that person, right? Therefore, it's unsuitable to like it. This is a bit like we were talking about the stick and the person or something. So there's like the person who is praising, and then there's the words of praise that they're telling us. Well, we're receiving the words of praise. Do the words of praise have something within them that kind of makes them the source of some sort of thing worthy of being happy about, joyous about, whatever? Well, no, the words themselves don't have any intention. It's the person who's speaking them that has an intention. So then one looks at that idea, that's the second part of it. It is known that the person praising one generates joy at the time of praising. If this joy of the person praising is stated as the reason for one's happiness, if you say, well, I get happy because this person is happy in praising me, they're having joy in praising me. Well, what use is the joy of the person praising, regardless of whether others or oneself is praised? Since the joy in another's continuum, the joy in their mind on the basis of their praising you or anyone else, is only their consciousness. So therefore, you don't attain even a part of it. Now, again, we do talk about rejoicing in others' joy and what have you. So it's not to say that we can't generate our own joy on the basis of that. But there's no sort of, from the side of the person, a joy that we can experience. It's their joy. It's their happy mind that is taking delight in praising your qualities or someone else's qualities. So again, it's just kind of poking holes in the idea of thinking, well, but it's perfectly fine for me to get angry at those who thwart my praise because I should be receiving that joy, that happiness from this transaction. Well, again, the transaction, it doesn't have anything within it that gives you joy. Joy is created from your own mind itself. It's not created from all of those things because there's nothing within the words that is imbued with that mind that you can share in that joy, nor are you able to actually know the joy of that other person who is praising you. And it's a kind of a strange argument, but nonetheless, it's getting at, we can't really find anything within that, as I said, sort of transaction that is the source of some sort of true joy that we would be upset at not being able to receive. So now let's go back to the outlines and take a look at the next section, the second part of this. If to be, I'm sorry, I should have put in another outline in here, I think, somehow. If to be desired due to being joy, then it is suitable to bring joy to all beings. So if it is suitable to kind of take joy in the other person's joy or something, then we should take joy in everyone's happiness, not just be happy at those who are praising us. So there is an actual part to this, and then there is a second part. It's liking being praised brings out childish behavior. So let's look at the actual. Verse 96 says, if I am happy due to their happiness, the person who's praising you, then I must act similarly towards all. And if this were so, then why am I unhappy when others are happy due to joy? So let's look at the explanation of this because the wording is a little strange. And I actually, again, didn't really care as much for the Gyaltsabje as I did for Abbot Drukpa Gyaltsen. So sorry. He says, if because of the happiness of the one who makes the praises, I am happy due to the happiness of another, to that other person then I must act similarly towards all beings and being happy due to their joy. It doesn't make sense to be, this is kind of hearkening back to what we just looked at earlier tonight, right? That when we talk about generating joy at the happiness of another, it should be equal. We shouldn't be discriminating in that. If we're happy at, our friend's happiness, well, then we should be happy at our enemy's happiness or at the person who's benefiting our enemy's happiness. We should have an equal joy in everybody's happiness. And he goes on to say, and if this were necessarily so, then why am I unhappy when due to the joy of others, that is, those who praise my enemies, we're back there again with those who are praising my enemies, others are happy. So he's kind of pointing back to that and saying once more, why do you get unhappy when even though that person's joyous and praising my enemies, I don't take joy in that. I'm not happy at their joy. I must be mentally happy, he says. So this once more is just pointing out inconsistencies. It's really inconsistent for us to think that we only take joy when somebody is praising us or whatever. We should take joy in anybody's happiness. That person who's praising us, the happiness they feel at praising us, but anyone who's praising anybody, even if they're praising your enemies, you should take happiness and delight in all of them equally. So then let's go on to the next outline and within this. Liking being praised brings out childish behavior. You know, kind of, it's the worst thing for you, being attached to being praised. Once more, it's one of the 8 worldly dharmas. Therefore, the happiness that arises from thinking, I am being praised, is thus incorrect. It is only the behavior of the childish. You know, there's nothing that's kind of mature and adult about that. You're just taking delight in these transitory words, producing some good feeling in you that don't have any substance to them, that have to be abandoned when you die, that, you know, don't live on in any way. They don't provide you with anything that's stable. It's childish to have an attachment to them. So here Gyaltsab says, the middle of page 37, therefore, if it generates joy in one's continuum, saying, I am being praised, when this is analyzed, then it does not have the slightest essence. There's nothing really to it that we're getting attached to. But that's true of all these 8 worldly concerns, you know, in terms of the 4 we are attached to, the 4 we are averse to receiving. You know, our preoccupation with them wastes our time and puts all of our energy and effort into something that isn't going to do anything for us, you know. And I'm not saying that, again, having these things in your life once more, that there's a problem with that. And some of these things can actually be very beneficial. And even part of what are called the 8 fruitions that bodhisattvas are encouraged to develop the karma for. This is actually in your Lam Rim text in the section on karma. At the very end, they talk about the 8 fruitions, not at the very end because they talk about purification, but at the end of like the whole section and all the various types of karma. The 8 fruitions are ways that we try to create the causes to have a long life, to have good health, to have a good reputation, a good standing in society, to be independent and free and so on. All these things that are so important to make this life meaningful. But that's a different context. That's using them as a way to make one's life meaningful, as a way to assure that we can benefit others with the life that we have as a human being. So again, it's different here because it's talking about the attachment to having all those things and making them an end in and of themselves. Having all those things in your life doesn't mean you lived a good life. And you might go to many funerals or whatever memorial services where people praise all the good things that somebody did with their life, all the wonderful, you know, vacations they had and things they saw and da 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 da. But those don't really amount to anything. You know, all of that is gone when the person's gone, didn't amount to anything, and may have even once more caused their ruin in future lives. So then in the last part of this commentary, Gyaltsab says, in this way, since the mere praise is not valid as the cause for happiness, one only becomes like a childish person by liking it. It only creates, you know, childish behavior. You know, we need informed behavior, adult behavior, wise behavior. And that's, of course, seeing that all of these things are not worth putting all of our attention and time into. They don't really amount to anything. Let's continue on. Now we're getting into the second part. We had the anger at obstructions to worldly dharmas, being unsuitable. This started on page 35 of the commentary. Now on page 37, in the middle, kind of towards the middle of the page, we have thinking of it as beneficial, kind of thinking of, again, you know, the whole process of rejecting praise and so forth, that there's great benefit to that. It's actually good for us not to be so concerned about our reputation and praise and what have you. So first, there's 2 parts within this. Anger at obstruction to praise and reputation is unsuitable as it obstructs the lower realms. So let's look at that. That has 2 parts. Through grasping at praise and reputation, all faults are generated. And then the other one is obstructing them, obstructs the lower realms. So let's look at verse 98, the idea that actually if we get quite attached to our praise and fame and so on, it only creates problems for us. Praise and the like distract me and also destroy my disillusionment. I start to envy those who have excellent qualities, and success is destroyed. Any virtuous progress I'm making gets destroyed. Now, again, most of the commentators don't delineate these into numbers. His Holiness the Dalai Lama does, and I think also Pema Chodron does. And they say there are 3 faults within this. And they say the first one is that they distract you. They kind of, get you preoccupied with stuff that you end up wasting time. Secondly, is the second line there, they destroy your disillusionment, meaning your renunciation, your disillusionment with samsara, because you don't feel so bad about samsara if you're getting praised and having, good reputation and all this stuff going along with it. And the third one would be that you have jealousy or envy to those who have greater qualities. And then I think in one of the translations in the one that Pema Chodron uses, it says, thus all success or all, good things are destroyed. And so then in that way we can talk about 3, but nonetheless, some commentators seem to talk about 4. And so this is in your handout, the commentary from Abbot Dr. Gyaltsen. So I'm going to put it on the screen, and we won't use Gyaltsabje's as I tend to do whenever I use Abbot Dr. Gyaltsen's. It says, I should not get angry with those who destroy my praise and fame because, and I delineated them here with numbers, 1, gaining praise, fame, and the like distract me from the objects of virtue, whereby, 2, they also destroy my disillusionment with respect to psychic existence. Again, you really need to have, a strong awareness of the unsatisfactory nature of existence to develop renunciation and then go on to develop bodhicitta. So it becomes problematic if we get, attached to praise and fame and think everything's just hunky-dory here in the samsaric existence. 3rd, I start to envy others who have excellent qualities. And 4th, my virtues and the success of others are destroyed. In other words, it causes me to ruin everything in the, along the way. Hence, praise, fame, and the like are the sources of all misdeeds. Now, I've also added some commentary because, again, well, first it has a little bit from Stages of the Path, but then the Lamrim Chenmo, and then I added some commentary for tonight's presentation from Geshe Sopa in his commentary on the Great Stages of the Path, the great treatise by Lama Tsongkhapa. Of course, this is in Volume 2, and by the way, Volume 2 and Volume 3 of Geshe Sopa's commentary are both worth checking up if you want to pursue further the teachings on the perfection of patience there. And he cites Shantideva all over the place. So that's why you get a number of these references in Abbot Dr. Gyaltsen's text. Again, that's the great treatise on the Stages of the Path by Lama Tsongkhapa, Volume 2. It says, develop disheartenment for praise and the like, thinking, praise and the like distract my mind with the meaningless, destroy my disillusionment with cyclic existence, make me jealous of those who have excellent qualities, and 4, cause my virtuous activities to degenerate. So nothing new there. We've seen those. Geshe Sopa, I kind of divided up his commentary with these same numerical references. He says, first, wise people are not preoccupied with purposeless words of admiration. When ordinary people, childish people, are praised, they start thinking of themselves as something special. They become conceited and attached to their reputation. When someone is completely distracted by fame and conceit, he or she feels happy. They just kind of get preoccupied with that. And again, by virtue of that, are distracted. They don't follow the path then. Secondly, for any spiritual practice, we must feel sorrow about the misery we and others experience. We have to want our own freedom from suffering, and we have to want to free others from such problems. Without this kind of sorrow, we have no spiritual goals. Our religious practice will go nowhere. Attachment to fame and praise destroy this very important kind of sorrow. It's kind of interesting word sorrow, word choice there, sorrow. It kind of means, again, feeling some dejection at having to see oneself and others suffer. And initially oneself, because that's the source of one's own renunciation, and then of course others, which becomes the source of our bodhicitta, our compassion, that will wish to benefit them. Third, furthermore, when we are vain about our reputation, we become jealous, seeing others with praiseworthy qualities or education. Our conceit makes us envious when someone receives more honor than we do. So we get into this whole competition thing, and we again put energy into that, and it increases our own jealousy and our own desire to kind of one up everyone else, because we can't stand that they're getting more praise than we are. And then fourth, the increase of our self-attachment confuses us, inviting and strengthening the other inner enemies, that all the other delusions kind of have free reign then. We become the servant of our inner enemies. We do all kinds of bad things based on pride and so forth. As a result, our virtuous activity degenerates. There is no good that comes from that. So again, this was just kind of a way of explaining a little bit further everything that's talked about in verse 98. Let's go through 99 and then we'll end for tonight. This is obstructing them. This is the very top of page 38. Obstructing them obstructs the lower realms. Therefore, are not those who are closely involved in destroying my praise and the like also engaged in protecting me from falling into the unfortunate realms? So if someone gets in the way of you getting praise and having a good reputation, we could actually see them as helping us. Why? Because they're helping us not to have those things that are going to be so enticing to us that we'll end up falling into those faults and developing those faults, not generating renunciation, getting more jealous, getting distracted and preoccupied with all of that. So we can actually be grateful for those people in our lives because they're helping us by thwarting our praise and our good reputation. How wonderful. Again, it makes some sense within the logic of what we're talking about. But that's once more how we have to see things more correctly in terms of the Buddha's teachings. And of course, karma being one of the most fundamental ones, that if we do all of that and get attached to this life and the praise and the fame that we have, well, then we're going to end up wasting this life. And we're going to end up having karmic consequences from our jealousy and from our engaging in unskillful behavior. So there's a very short commentary to this on the top of page 38. Therefore, aren't those taking great care in destroying one's praise, reputation, and so forth actually engaged in protecting one from falling into the lower realms? How can one be angry at them? This is kind of, we're getting into this whole section where we are once more recognizing that those who harm us are actually great boons to our practice. And we can start seeing them through that light. How wonderful that we have people who annoy us in our lives, who get in the way of our praise and our reputation and our material gain and whatever it is that would normally cause our ruin, normally cause us to get preoccupied with all of that. Of course, you have to have the strength of mind to practice that way, but that's the whole gist of this chapter, is to get you to see that your choice to practice patience in the face of those things happening, somebody getting in the way of all these various things that you want to attain and accomplish that are just worldly, that they are actually doing you a great favor. And so you can then, practice patience in regard to it, because you see that that is the way to have gain from that situation. When someone is doing something negative to you, you can gain from that by not doing the habitual thing, not reacting with anger, but rather developing patience, developing fortitude. And you can see the logic for all of it, that Master Shantideva is going to great lengths in explaining that it doesn't make sense to retaliate, to get back at others, to react with the same mind of anger and jealousy and all these things that are problematic. So are there any comments or questions from tonight? We have a few minutes left if people have something that they'd like to share or ask.
Hello.
Nothing? Oh, yes, Andrea. Hello.
Hello, how are you? Quick question. So I'm listening to you and I'm hearing, and I hear a lot of, I think it's an invitation to stay in discomfort. So what's the antidote? Like, what is the immediate thought that you recommend when you are in that situation where you recognize that you're about to lose, because I think we have a lot of things saying like, I have to do this, it's my calling, or I have my career, or, like I am right. What is the immediate, placeholder that you should kind of go for before you jump? Make sense what I'm saying? Because I think it talks a lot about what you can do, but it's like, what do you do?
I guess what I got stuck kind of was at the beginning when you said kind of to stay in discomfort. And I'm not sure that that's the advice that he's giving us necessarily. If we go back to once more what I was talking about a short while ago, that he says everything starts with the fuel of mental unhappiness. When something comes into our sphere of experience, be it somebody getting in the, like criticizing us, or getting in the way of our material gain, or whatever the case might be, when they become an obstacle like that for us, we experience mental unhappiness initially. right? It doesn't feel good to have that happen to you. But there's a choice we have at that point, that we've been learning all the tools to help us to develop a inner happiness and inner joy when we experience those things that defeats the mental unhappiness or the discomfort. I mean, I'm not saying that you're going to get rid of, you're not going to feel any pain or any, anguish at anything that goes on in the world around you. It's just you're going to be very good and adept at being able to convert that into a source of joy, because we see that these are actually the challenging things in our lives that will help us to grow and develop, that will help us to actually invest in the Bodhisattva path and in our future enlightenment and all the things that we're talking about on this path. So I don't think that, this idea, and that's why, like I said, I got a little hung up on that when you said that, because I don't think Master Shantideva is saying hang out with this discomfort. Now, again, we did just touch on that idea that we have to be able to cultivate some level of, he called it sorrow, again, in that translation of Geshe Sopa's commentary, that, we have to be able to see samsara for what it is. We have to see that it's unsatisfactory. But even in the space of that, I mean, I wouldn't say that the mind of renunciation is like a dour mind that's like totally depressed about things. In the master's program where I studied, the translator there was a man named Tupten Sherab. He was a Sherpa. English wasn't his first language. And so when he would translate the meaning of renunciation, he would say, people need to have a depression with samsara, be depressed about samsara. And that's not what we really mean by renunciation. It doesn't mean being depressed. It means seeing it for what it is. Being disillusioned with it, disenchanted with it is even a better word. We no longer are taken by it. We no longer are caught up in it. And in the space of that, there's actually room for great joy, because we see that we don't need to keep putting all of our energy and attention into creating the source for that attachment and everything that attachment desires. And we see that we're better off putting our energy into things that will be more lasting, that when we get to the end of this life, we can actually take something with us. What will you take with you? You will take your practice of patience. You will take your practice of generosity, your practice of all of these perfections and everything you've done that is virtuous. Of course, you take your non-virtue as well. But, the idea is that we want to have that packed up for our next life and be able to, use all of these experiences for that. So again, maybe I've answered your question by approaching it from that, but if not, maybe can you say a little more, Andrea?
No. I was just trying to, I'm listening and I say, okay, I find myself in that situation. I think what I talk about discomfort is because for me it's like, okay, I find myself in an uncomfortable situation. You either recognize as a learning opportunity where you find the joy and that's your teacher, or you react, right? So that's what I say, the discomfort comes when you have to decide which path you're going to go. and then you I guess what I'm hearing you say is that there's a joy in recognizing that that's helpful for you as opposed to going in the reactive mode, correct?
Absolutely. You got it. Perfect. Yeah, because I think that's where we do want to, through our own confidence in the teachings, and again, following the logic of what Shantideva is setting out, see that we are making the right choice when we say, I'm not going to react with anger. I'm going to be patient in the face of this. I'm not going to follow my habitual patterns. I'm going to develop my familiarity with patience, which, as Master Shantideva said earlier, there's nothing whatsoever that doesn't become easier through the force of familiarity. So by becoming patient with small things and eventually larger things, I will have that familiarity. And we do see many people coming into this life very patient, very capable of dealing with problems with no difficulty, And so we want to be that. We want to have that. So the only way we're going to get there is by making that choice again and again. And we see the logic for that choice. And the fact that it can be a very joyful choice, because it is the source of your own well-being ultimately, as well as the well-being of others.
Yeah, thank you. For me,
wonderful.
I think it's also taking your ego out, right? Like not feeling attacked, because I think that's where we get, it's just saying, okay, if I made a mistake, it's okay, push it back and go to that joyful learning path, right?
Well, this is where we do see how much the ego is involved, especially when we get to what we've been talking about tonight, praise and fame. I mean, it gets totally caught up in that, right? Because that feeds that sense of us being so much bigger than we think we are, or whatever. It kind of gives us all that fuel. So again, yeah, at the root of all of this is this I grasping, self-grasping, and the ego that comes with that, that we get so invested in. That is just like the sandcastle that we were talking about
Yeah.
earlier. You
But
know,
it's so many things to peel off before you can see the joy that you end up getting caught up in the reaction.
yeah. I mean, I think it does take some time to get into that joy, but I think we can taste some of that joy here and there, every one of us through our practice, you know. If we look back on where we were and what we were like before we met the Dharma, we probably see ourselves as not being quite as joyous and happy as what we are now. I hope that's the case. If not, maybe we're not practicing it correctly or not, maybe not enough too. I don't know. That's always a possibility, but you know, the Dharma is a source of joy. Rinpoche talks about, he always uses that phrase, the happiness of Dharma, which of course is not, you know, mundane happiness. It's the deeper happiness we develop as we generate more and more conviction, and this being the method for achieving our greatest welfare as well as helping others to do the same, you know. So anyway, thank you for that, Andrea. That was good. Any other comments or questions before we close up tonight? Yes, Fernando.
Something that helped me a lot that you mentioned last week was it to realize that we are the cause of other people to be damaging us, and then that's important. That's the reason why we should be patient, so that in the next life, whenever we encounter again, then they don't have to harm us because we didn't respond to their harm at that time. And it has been so important for me to think about, or in that way, towards my enemies, so that I'm the cause of they being my enemies. So it's extremely important to not react and to have patience. And I have been leading some meditation saying that. Nonetheless, today, just minutes before the class, I got angry. You know? So not there yet, but I'm trying.
You're doing the work though, Fernando. That's the important thing. And again, that is one of the most central things that you pointed out that we need to recall, is that this isn't, you know, from the side of this person 100%, they're to blame. We are the active participant in this and the major creator of this. You know, we created the karma that ripened into that experience. And it just disarms it completely if we're able to really have the confidence in that. Of course, having confidence in karma is a challenge for a lot of people. So that's a whole nother thing we need to work on. That's why, once more, this is Bodhisattva great scope teachings. We have to depend upon middle scope and lower scope teachings. And the lower scope is where you're taught all about karma. So everything we learn up to this point feeds into the understanding of how we approach something like patience. But I think it's, you know, I agree with you. I think it's one of the most powerful things. You know, if we keep recalling that every time when something happens, go, wow, this is my karma ripening. And, you know, Pema Chodron, in one of her teachings, she says, you know, that, of course, when we hear about karma, we might have that thought, tell me again why this isn't my fault, you know, because we want to like blame ourselves and we want to feel guilty about it. And that's the tendency in our culture, right, is to think we're horrible people because look at what we created. Look at what's in my life. Look at the people I have. Look at the things I'm experiencing. I must be a really lousy person. I must be awful. Well, that's not the message we should be taking from it. Again, to see it as a lesson to be learned. It's another thing that Pema Chodron always talks about, that karma is life giving you the lessons you need to learn. So pay attention, look at it, you know, be excited about it. It's all school, it's all learning, it's all, you know, what is happening right now is exactly what I need to learn, and try to do what you can to learn from that. So, and we're still going to get angry. Yeah, you know, this is the reality of it. You know, I think in these days with everything that's going on and the tension in our society, and of course everything that's happened with people being shut off from each other to a large extent, you know, physically not being able to connect and what have you, has caused a lot more stress and difficulty. So, you know, acknowledge that those are parts of it too. But nonetheless, you know, take ownership of what's going on, but especially take ownership of what's going on in your own mind. So like what Andrea was saying, you can choose at that point not to follow the habitual pattern and react with anger, but rather start a new habit or reinforce the habit of being patient, having that response. Good. Thank you, Fernando. Okay, let's go ahead and close for tonight. Again, if there are any other questions that people had from tonight, feel free to either write to me or you can write them down and put them in the chat box for next week. I think we're doing just fine. We will make it through the end of the chapter by 2 weeks from tonight, so we have 2 more classes. Let's go ahead and do the closing prayers for tonight. Okay. we have first the prayer where we dedicate all the positive potential that we've created for our own enlightenment, and then by virtue of that, the enlightenment of all beings. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. And then this wonderful prayer about bodhicitta, that is the strong wish that we develop that mind within our own hearts and grow it, and never let it decrease in the least. And then also we can make this strong prayer that others develop this in their minds. As I've been pointing out, these days, especially our world leaders. You think about especially the parts of the world where there are, like in Belarus with what's going on there, but we don't have to look far either in terms of what's happening in the United States. Wouldn't it be wonderful if world leaders had this mind that wishes to benefit others? And even just the compassion that is a part of this mind. It would be incredible if beings were ruling and helping others in their countries with that state of mind. So let's make this prayer for all beings as well as ourselves to generate this mind very deeply. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow. And may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. And then the prayers for our teachers, by saying these brief prayers for His Holiness and Lama Zopa, may this become the cause for all spiritual guides to have good health and long lives. The wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. You who uphold the subduer's moral way, who serve as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunath's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplish magnificent prayers honoring the three jewels, Savior of myself and others, your disciples, please, please live long. And then as usual, since we all have beings that we're holding in our hearts right now, those that we know or those whose situation moves us, who are experiencing obstacles or illness, who are dying or who have died, send this positive potential out to those beings that you're thinking of right now, and think that it becomes the cause to immediately remove all of their suffering and to create for them all the causes that will lead to perfect happiness. And may all beings find true peace and happiness through our efforts here tonight. Wonderful. Thank you all so much. I'm enjoying this very much. It's going to be sad when the patience chapter ends, but we'll have another one following. So anyway, everyone take care. Please stay safe, stay healthy.
Thank you,
And
Don.
I will see you all next week.
Thank you, Don.